Well, hello there. Today is March 19th, 2024. I think the last video that we talked about, that was still in Old Testament survey, the first part. Now we're in Old Testament survey 2. I was actually, they finally finished with our grades, and I was going to go through those, and that course disappeared from the dashboard. So we're over with that. I wanted to kind of talk about it a little bit more and show you some stuff, but they cut my access from it, I guess you could put it that way. But the main thing, the last test that I did, I think I missed, out of the 70 questions, I think I missed 9, which was a score of just below 90%, like around 87 or 88%. It was definitely a harder test, and I think the main thing that makes it harder is whenever we have to spell out things. So I was actually asking us about, the priests that were. I remember one answer that I answered incorrectly was, it was about what is the name of a priest that joined David in the cave. I have no idea. I just remembered that one name that I remembered very well. It was Abiathar. And I think there were 4 questions where I put in Abiathar, and one of them was correct. The priest that joined David in the cave was Gad. There was going to be no way I could have written that out. If it was a multiple choice question, maybe I could choose it between the 4 and have a 25% chance of answering it correctly. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. So the test was a little bit more difficult than the first midterm test for Old Testament 1. But whenever I was submitting the results, I knew that I was probably going to get mid-80s or higher 80s. And at first, when I looked at it, it was like 84%. But then I looked at my responses, and there were two questions where I misspelled a few things, but just by one letter. One of them was pretty dumb, actually. I was asking about the tribe, and I wrote the tribe of Benjamin. Benjamin was the correct answer, and I think I was asking what tribe is Saul from. I was the tribe of Benjamin, and for some reason I wrote Benjamin with an E at the end. There's no E, and then when I was looking over the results, I saw that, well, that's obviously a mistake. I didn't write them anything, thinking that they would correct that, just like they did with the first test, and they did. So instead of 59, so instead of missing 11 out of 70, I missed 9 out of 70 with a score, like I said, I think it was like 86, 87%. My final score for that. For that class, for the course, right, for the class, was 93%. It's either almost 93 or almost 94. So it is an A-. I'm happy with that. And to be honest with you, I think what's more important is the information that I will retain from the class. And I wasn't really upset about not scoring higher in the last test, because it's important to know some of those details, some of those names, but that's not the most important thing. So missing Gad from that test did not bother me. Misspelling Benjamin did bother me for a little bit, but everything's good. We passed that test, A-, not the test, but the whole class. Now we're starting with Old Testament survey 2, and I think in the last video I was mentioning how, well, we're starting this class on Monday, and I still don't have it in my system. It's because I remember when the first class was, so he's calling, I'm going to take a little pause. Okay, I just had a 40-minute phone call, and I'm trying to gather my thoughts, what we talked about. I think I was talking about the test, the first class, the first part of Old Testament survey. Really interesting, highly recommend. The second part is a little bit tougher. We'll go over the schedule. We completed the first week. The first week was pretty hard. Just a lot of reading. So as far as the commitment, it's about 20 hours a week, right? 21, 18, 20, 14, 18. So about, and then 32 hours. That's probably for the book review. My book review was actually at what, 90. It was 27 out of 30. So I don't know, 95%. That's the one that I was struggling or worried about the most. But the book review was good. This time, the message, the book review, the message of the prophets. It's this book right here. Very interesting book. Goes through all the prophets, what period they lived in, what their message was. Basically, the three-part message of almost every prophet was, repent. You sin, you have to repent. If you're not going to repent, there's going to be consequence. And in this form, the consequence in the form of other nations taking over Israel. But the third part of every message was that there was going to be the future. Majority of the prophets talk about that, the three-part promise. And that's what, and the thing that helps me with that is instead of reading it, I was able to find an audiobook for it. I downloaded the audiobook, and I've been listening to it every time I drive to work, to the firehouse, back from the firehouse, and it's been saving me a lot of time. But for the first week, we had to read 12 plus 5, 17, 37 chapters for the first week. So 37 chapters of reading. Chapter 7 of the book, Yesterday, Today, and Forever, and that was probably about 60 pages. It was a lot. Then I have to create my own message of the prophets reading plan. Then the lectures, instead of 30-minute lectures, now they're almost 1 hour. So usually this was about 2 hours. Now it almost doubled. Reading report and discussions where you have to write stuff. Haler worksheets. The first one was really tough. There were like 12 questions, and they were like really hard questions, and they were like expensive questions. I truly spent an hour and a half on that. And this week, the week just started. Today is Tuesday. Yesterday was at the firehouse, but I think Saturday evening, I've read 20 chapters in one evening just to catch up with all the reading. I've got to watch some lectures. I think this week's going to be a little bit easier. But yeah, here's the schedule. And for this week, I think I just need to finish up Chronicles and Ezra. I think Ezra is about 10 chapters. Yesterday and Today and Forever I already read. The Message of the Prophets I already listened to. Then I got to do some lectures. And then reading report and discussions. This week is my Kelly week, meaning that I'm off for 5 days. So from the firehouse. So I'm gonna try to do 2 weeks in 1 week, because next week I'm starting with the firehouse, and then I'm gonna have to. I have a little cabinet project that I need to do. So I'm gonna try to get everything done this week. What's the part that I wanted to share with you guys? This video is about the divided kingdom. It was interesting to read about that, and that is in the same book, right? Yesterday, Today, and Forever. Very interesting book. I would recommend buying it if you guys are interested. It's not a hard read, but it does explain a lot of things. And I think one of my favorite ones before this was explanation of the sacrifices, right? How the Old Testament says that you're going to be cleansed with the blood. The New Testament says that no blood of the animals will wash your sins away. And then you kind of see like, well, is this a contradiction in the Bible that we find, in the explanation of that? And I think I shared about that in the last video. Just kind of opening up your eyes to different, to connecting the Old Testament with the New Testament. And in this part of the book, was the chapter number 7. It was talking about the divided kingdom, part 2, and it was talking about the divided kingdom. And before, to me, it was always interesting. How did this happen? How did the kingdom split? When did it split? How did it split? And how did it function after that? Because we read that the the nation of Israel was one nation. It came out of Egypt. It crossed. It was in the desert for 40 years because they didn't trust the Lord. Then they finally crossed the Jordan. And with Joshua, Moses was not allowed into the promised land. They crossed the Jordan with Joshua, and then that's when the period of judges started. They didn't have a king, but they had judges that judged them, right? And then it wasn't a king. They didn't have that kingly, how do I say it, a role, right? But they were like prophets. Judges, like I consider judges as like prophets, almost, and in a different form. Not true prophets, but in the form when they were telling Israel what they needed to do. One judge in mind, Samson was one of those judges, and I kind of wonder why he was a judge, how he was fitting into that role, because he was pretty much everything that he was portraying or showing all the negative qualities of what judge should not be. But with this class, we're touching everything on the surface level. We're not doing the deep study. So the Samson question, I cannot answer why he was a judge. What was the purpose of him being a judge? All that I know, it was the will of God, and he planned it. It wasn't something that just happened and God had to be reactive to it. Our God is not reactive. He knows the beginning, the end from the beginning. There was a purpose for it. God is also a God of purpose. But I don't have the answer to that yet. So after Judges, there was a period when the Israelites wanted to have a king just like the other nations, right? They were comparing themselves to the other nations. All the other nations have a king. We want a king. And when the prophet was saying, your king's going to be taxing you. Your king's going to be taking the best of your fields. They're going to take your sons and daughters. The Israelites, the nation of Israel, was fine with that. So they wanted the king. There was the King Saul, was the first king, and then King David, and then King Solomon. And after that, growing up in the Christian atmosphere, I knew that the kingdom split, that there was something, but I didn't have the defined knowledge of the events. What happened? How did it split? Even though we can find it in the Bible. And I'd say I was, in my teens, I was reading Bible a lot, but maybe because we didn't have the resources that we have now, that we can actually go and look and get some knowledge about some specific topics. I never knew what happened. And in this chapter where they're talking about the divided kingdom, and I'm probably going to be reading I'm going to read the whole thing, or the interesting things in the chapter, and then going to comment on that. And I think that's all that I'm going to share with this video, this episode. The divided kingdom. Rehoboam, Solomon's firstborn, began his reign over the most powerful state in the Middle East. So when Solomon died, the nation of Israel was literally a powerful nation. It was a rich nation because Solomon acquired a lot of wealth. They had military strength. So his son Rehoboam, and that's when it gets complicated, because in this particular sense, we're going to be reading about Rehoboam and Jeroboam, right? And then there's a Jeroboam first, and Jeroboam's the second, and it just gets a little bit confusing. So Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, after Solomon's death, was going to take over the nation of Israel. Why would Rehoboam go to Shechem for his coronation when the capital was in Jerusalem? Jerusalem was the capital, and then when we read in the Bible, it says that he went to Shechem. Well, I was thinking I was going to explain that, and I kind of have it in my head, but I don't want to sound stupid, so I'm just going to read and make my comments. The northern tribal areas felt under Solomon that they were shortchanged in terms of representation of services. They probably resent the fact that the tribe of Judah seems to benefit most from the central government. So at that time, the northern tribe were feeling like, well, Solomon was a great king, but Solomon had taxed them a lot, right? People were paying a lot to, I don't know if you could say that, like to support the nation, the government, right? Because there were a lot of expenses, and they were heavily taxed under Solomon. And at that time, when we look at the map of Israel, right, everything, the capital was Jerusalem. But if we look at the map, it's the southern part of the state. So some tribes felt like they were not represented in Israel as much as, let's say, Judah did, right? So they were saying, well, why is Judah so much better? Why does the capital have to be in Judah? So they kind of felt like they were second-class citizens in that case. All the power was concentrated in Judah and in Jerusalem. Shechem was, of course, a revered site of Israelite memory, the place where Abram pitched his tent when where Jacob purchased a plot of land. Jeroboam, here's another person that we're reading about. Jeroboam attended the coronation at the insistence of the northern tribes. And we read about Jeroboam's earlier. He was Solomon's helper with administrating the forced labor. And at one point, following an extraordinary word of prophecy promising him rule over the house of Israel, Jeroboam rebels against Solomon, and we'll read that in 1 King 11. And then when Solomon finds out, Jeroboam flees to Egypt for sanctuary, and he stays there until Solomon dies. When Solomon dies, Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, takes over the nation of Israel. That's when the northern tribes, I have a map here, right? We had Manasseh, on both sides of Jordan, and then Asher, Naphtali, Zebulun, Issachar, Gad, Ephraim. They were all northern tribes, and they invited Jeroboam from Egypt to represent them or be there when Rehoboam was going to come in and basically for coronation to Shechem. Jeroboam forms a government in exile while in Egypt and keeps in touch with other dissidents in the north. The coronation affords Jeroboam the perfect opportunity to challenge the young king away from his power base in Judah. Right. So now Rehoboam left Jerusalem. He's going to Shechem, that represents northern tribes, and then they invited the Jeroboam, which was a dissident that fled from Solomon to Egypt, and he stayed there until Solomon died, because Solomon was going to kill him, I'm assuming. They make, let's see here, as soon as Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, arrives at Shechem, they make demands, and not the oaths of loyalty. Their complaints are primarily twofold. They demand a cut in taxes and cutback in the manpower allotted to the forced labor gangs, it says here. Rehoboam, taken by surprise, requested a delay of 3 days so that he could sort out the issues involved in this demand. Right. So Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, arrives to Shechem, and they're saying, "Hey, we have two things. Like, if you're going to be our king, we need two things. Your father was taxing us a lot. We can't. That is not sustainable. We can't do that. We don't want that. We want taxes to be cut. And also, your father was using us for certain things, right? Forced labor." And they were saying how they're not going to be okay with that either. There needs to be a change in that. And Rehoboam didn't know that they were going to ask him about it. He was taken totally by surprise. And he's like, "Well, give me 3 days and I'll think about it, and then, I'll tell you what we're going to do." So, and in the instance that we, some of us, maybe we can't recall it now, but as soon as I talk about it, I think the majority of us will remember that, where there were two two different views as far as the solution. So there were older, what do you call them, advisors, experienced advisors that were telling Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, do what those people are asking you, and if you're going to do that, they're going to be your slaves forever, in the sense of they're going to be loyal to you, they're going to stay with you, they're going to acknowledge you as the king. That was the not the purpose, but the advice of the older advisors, right? But then the younger ones, we read about the advice of the younger advisors, the ones that grew up with Rehoboam, and they were saying how, well, you basically got to show who's the boss. You got to tell him that if my dad I'm gonna be taxing you even more. If my dad was this, I'm gonna be even greater than him. So you have to set the precedence. You have to show who's the boss. So then they're gonna acknowledge you as the king that rules, that has authority. And that was their advice. And I think a part of that judgment was when they grew up in the atmosphere where they didn't have they didn't see all the struggles. They were close to the political power, so they were growing up in Jerusalem with the atmosphere of everything is easy. We're not going through the same struggles. They could not relate to what the other tribes were experiencing, and since they were involved in the political life, they were saying how, well, if the taxes get cut, then we're not going to benefit from it. Obviously, we have to think for ourselves too. So if those guys want to start paying less taxes, that's directly going to affect us. So unfortunately, Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, follows their advice, and he says, let's see here, if today, and before I continue on, I just wanted to read few things that I highlighted. And I have highlighted a lot. Like, I don't know if you can see that. That page is pretty much all highlighted. There's not that much on the second one, but a lot of highlights. So the older one, the experienced advisors were giving him the best advice he could have. In effect, the key to success is to adopt the attitude of a servant. In short, they urge him to embrace the ideals of kingship enshrined in the Mosaic Law. If today you will be a servant to these people and serve them and give them favorable answer, there will always be your servants. That's what the older advisors were saying. That's in the 1 King 11. The young men who have grown up with Rehoboam have a different agenda. To them, the demands of the Northerns are a direct challenge to the legitimacy of Rehoboam's reign. Their approach is show these people who's the boss. According to them, there's no time to back down or show leniency. Rehoboam must assert his power in no uncertain terms. Only in this way will the protesters be silenced. The reputations and promotions as leaders and administrators are at stake for these young men in days ahead. They have grown up in relative luxury and abundance. They have little understanding of living conditions for the average Israelite who's trying to make ends meet with an ever-increasing tax burden. So then, let's see here. Growing up, Rehoboam lets his peers guide his decision, and it's faithful decision. And then we read in 1 King 12, when all Israel saw that the king refused to listen to them, they answered the king, "What share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, O Israel, look after your own house, O David." So the Israelites went home. From now on, we will refer to the northern tribes as Israel and the southern tribes as Judah. It was mainly Judah, but there were parts of Benjamin and Simeon with remnants of the scattered Levites. And later we read how Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, he fled back home to Jerusalem, and then he started gathering people together. saying how, well, we got to take back what's ours. And he got all the people riled up, got his army put together, and then we see that that division was actually a divine judgment upon the people of Israel. And God said that do not go, because I don't remember how it read exactly, but it was from the Lord for it to happen that way. So basically, in short terms, what happened, the power struggle, right? Rehoboam wanted to keep the power, and he wasn't trying to be a servant. He wasn't trying to look out for the interest of the rest of the Israelites, and he followed the advice of the younger advisors to keep the taxes the same, to keep the forced labor. And that's when all those northern tribes chose their new king for Israel. And from now on, and from that division, we start hearing about two separate entities, Israel and Judah. And Israel would be referred to the northern part of Israel, right? The remaining tribes, and Judah would remain in the south, capital within the capital as well, which is Jerusalem. And majority of the people, when we read from that point on, the northern kingdom did not follow God as much as Judah did. And Judah had some kings that were not, that they were in good, that they were in following God, but pretty much almost every king from the north, from Israel, did not follow God. They established syncretism, which basically they combined the worship of the Lord with some other religions, Baal worship. Then they have their high spots that they were worshiping on. They had so many different gods, and they still worship Lord to to a certain degree, right? They actually create Jeroboam actually kicked all the prophets to the south, and he established his own prophets. And later, when we read when we see that conflict between the prophets of the south with the prophets from the north, because the prophets from the north were not legitimate prophets. They were established by those kings. And I think we also read in the Bible how after that division, everybody that followed the Lord, and everybody that was truly following God, they went to the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah. And that's how we started to refer to, two separate kingdoms, Judah and Israel. Israel was more wicked, and they were actually going to get to Assyrians were going to attack them first. They went to slavery to Assyrians 200 years before Judah. Judah was going to get conquered by Babylon later on, but that didn't happen until a few hundred years later, and it was not by Assyrians, it was by Babylon. And the last chapters that I read, there were a lot of good kings in the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah, but a lot of them had this description of them, like they followed God, they did this and that. But a lot of those kings had buts. The only two good kings that we read about were Hezekiah and Josiah. There are no buts in their reign. Hezekiah was a good king. Josiah was a great king. Those are the only two good kings that we read about from Judah that followed God completely. And another interesting thing was that the line of David stayed in Judah, right? Every king that was after David, Solomon, and Rehoboam was from Judah, just like the promise said. With the northern kingdom, you really had to watch your back if you were a king. There were a lot of different tribes that wanted to be. There were a lot of different kings from different tribes. There was a lot of assassinations, and there were not good kings. And I think that would kind of summarize everything about that divided kingdom. That chapter was my probably second favorite chapter, along with the explanation of. I mentioned that. See, with English being my second language, sometimes I try looking for words, and sometimes they don't come up to me right away. The жертвоприношение, that's the Russian word for it. Sin offerings, жертвоприношение. Oh boy. But it's going to bother me. Жертвоприношение. And I think that's a part of why why I'm recording everything without any editing, because I want it to be natural. This is who I am. Sin offerings by Israelites. Not the sin. The word is not the sin offering. Жертвоприношение. You know what? It's gonna bother me. Let me see here. I have a translator. I just can't believe that I forgot the word. I can't remember it. Sacrifices. There you go. Sacrifices. I don't know why I couldn't remember that. But yeah, this week was a little bit harder. The last week that I completed, a lot more reading. I feel like I'm spending about 10 to 15 hours every week between reading and reports and everything. I'm really happy that I've got the audiobook version of that book that I need to read, The Message of the Prophets. I think that's been helping me out a lot. And then lectures are a little bit longer, so I'm going to have to make sure be a little bit better with my time during the second half of the Old Testament. And as far as the spiritual life, like right now, like if before I could live and not read the Bible for months at a time, and still, being a Christian, because I was Christian my whole life. Right now, I can't picture myself not reading the Bible for a day or two. And because now I'm in the seminary, sometimes I would focus on, let's say I'm reading the book first, and there will be a day where I would just read the book for 2 days, but then I have to catch up with the Bible reading. And then whenever I catch up, it's anywhere between 15 to 25 chapters at a time. So that's what I really like in this process, in this, going through the seminary, is all that time that I had before, spending that time on things that don't matter. Now I don't have that time because I have to do the seminary first. So I really like that fact, and I've been thinking about that lately, that there were a lot of times when I didn't have time because I was doing something else. And we always fill our time with something else. And whenever we say, I don't have time for this, that means that that thing that we're talking about is not on our preference list, right? Because if something were going to happen, it was really important, we would find time for it. Let's say if I don't have any time, but all of a sudden my tire goes flat. Well, guess what? I will find time, even if I don't have time, to get that fixed. If let's say if I'm slammed with work and I don't have a lot of time, and I have a client that calls me and wants to be pre-qualified, and I sense that this particular person is not going to waste my time, well, guess what? I am finding time in the midst of not having time, because now it's on my preference list, right? So that's what I've been noticing lately, that I do have time. I do find time, even though sometimes it's not as easy. But I don't have time to spend on stupid YouTube watching or something on Instagram. And I'm really happy about that. And I guess my prayer been lately, because there's a lot of things that I want and vision and picture for my future. And I think I've shared with you guys before that I've been praying for God's will to happen, not necessarily my will, because I can see things the way I want it to, right? I want it to happen, but that necessarily doesn't mean that it's going to be the God's way of happening. Even though my things are, my plans or dreams are good, right? Oh, well, that's for the Lord. I think this would be awesome, and that would benefit the kingdom. But at the same time, I have to understand that that might not be the plan. There are things in the Bible that we read about that you would think would benefit the Lord's kingdom, and people want to do them. Like even in the example of David, he wanted to build a temple. What did God tell him? You're not going to build it. Your son's going to build it for me. So that's been my prayer in the past probably 6 months. And I think what I started praying for another thing, and that thing was the discernment between waiting on the Lord, knowing when I need to wait, when I need to God just take His time, because sometimes you have to wait. In the case of Moses, he lived for 120 years. He lived 40 years in Egypt. Then he fled from Egypt and he lived in the wilderness for 40 years. Sometimes you would think, oh man, it's what a waste of time, right? When he came back to Egypt, he was 80 years old, and he accomplished so much in the 40 years until he died at 120. So if you take the last 40 years and you looked at the previous 80, you would think, what a waste of time, right? He could have done so much during the time that he was in the wilderness. And I think that kind of serves as an example to me that God works on His own timing, not necessarily our timing. Zealots during the New Testament, they were doing things to bring the kingdom sooner, right? They were trying to provoke the Romans, or they were doing things, killing Roman soldiers, just to hoping to bring the kingdom of Israel sooner than. In their case, it turned out to be in a total different way of what they picture. But there were some people that we read about in the Bible trying to speed something up, right? So my prayer has been lately to wait on the Lord and ask for discernment where I have to wait, and to actually give me courage and give me wisdom to act when I need to act. And I think that's a very hard balance, because you kind of have to take your will out from a lot of situations and ask for God's will. At the same time, you want to listen to God's will, and sometimes you have to let go and just wait, and sometimes you have to act. So that's what I've been praying on lately about the discernment. And I hope that you're praying for me as well, even if you might be watching the video, a month, 2, 5 years, or 15, 20 years down the road. For God to work in my heart and pray for me, and pray for me to have God's interests in my heart above everything else, above my own interests. And that's been my prayer, and I thank God that He's putting me through this journey. I'm enjoying it. It's not super easy, but I have joy. So that's the end of this video, and I'll see you at the next one.